Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. Welcome to another episode. I'm your host, Charisse Walker, and my question for you today is motherhood. How's it going? And being a wife, if you're a wife, and trying to juggle all of that while you're a business owner. And so today we're going to talk about not really business, but more relationships and motherhood and being a partner, if that is who you are. So without further ado, I have Sari Barron with us today, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, Charisse. So I'm a licensed marriage family therapist, and I've been in practice for over 15 years. My practice is in California. I'm also the founder of a group practice, SoCal Individual Family and Trauma Therapy. My main focus and passion is really there's a couple of aspects to it is trauma PTSD. I'm also an EMDR certified and an approved consultant therapist, as well as parenting and adolescence. So I just thank you so much for having me. I love chatting with other moms. I love chatting all things. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, and this is a conversation I could go on for hours, and so it's going to be hard
Yeah.
to not. But when I wrote the book, Flipping the Iceberg, the whole purpose was because you never know the person. When I went through my divorce, and if you've listened to other episodes, it talks about really the person I was married to before, he could walk into a room, everybody loved him. He's like, Charisse, what's your problem when we ended up divorcing? And so then as years went by, it's like, oh, I see that person and he's a great person, but what goes on behind closed doors is very different. And so when I wrote the book, that underlying, instead of this discovering and celebrating what lies beneath the surface, it was actually from trauma to triumph. Because as I was writing the book, I realized how much trauma I had experienced in my younger years that affected my marriage. And so had I been able to deal with some of that trauma, our marriage might have been different. Now, I'm not taking full responsibility at all, but I think it takes two to tango. And when you're getting into a relationship, if you haven't dealt with that trauma, it does carry into the relationship. And I talked about how it can sink it or not. And so when you deal with, because obviously everybody has trauma, it could be very significant to like mine sixth grade playground situation that affected me, right? And so how do you help people deal with that and heal from trauma? And I know that's a huge.
It is a big question. Yeah, it's a big question. And I think that maybe a little bit relieving is there isn't really a right way. However, um, if you're going to therapy, that's mostly just talk therapy, then you're really accessing just what's cognitive, what you're aware of in what we call this prefrontal cortex in the brain. And trauma is really stored in the nervous system. It's actually stored so many different ways. It's stored through the brain cognitions, it's stored through somatic body experiences, through images, through emotions. So it is stored negative beliefs about self, like I am worthless or I am unsafe or I'm not enough, things like that. So you really want to go to likely a therapist or even as you're exploring in understanding where is it living in these nonverbal ways. And you're going to want to start to get curious about that. And at the very least, even if you're not, we all have triggers. We all have things that have impacted us over our lives. And some of them require more care because it's impossible for us to know exactly how to give ourselves what we need when we're in a trigger sometimes. And sometimes it's really just about an awareness. So let's say just initially you're in relationship, let's say with your husband or your children or friends, and you're noticing you're having like a visceral big reaction for whatever reason. That's likely something that's getting triggered. It doesn't necessarily have to be these kind of big T traumas. There can be these little
Sure.
T experiences over time that the brain starts to then organize how the world works. So I don't, so there's in terms of modalities,
Yeah.
right, of working through trauma, because it is a very big question, and I could probably talk for a very long time about it. But there's EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and there's brain spotting, which I also do. There's internal family systems, working with different aspects and self states and parts of us. There's somatic therapies, somatic experiencing. Those are all, and usually when I work, it's an integration of many different modalities depending on how and where the trauma is stored for, for the clients. So.
I love that you talk about that because a lot of times I think some of our listeners, and I will say even for me, that when you think of a therapist, you go the stereotypical lay on the couch. I've never experienced that one, but lay on the couch, talk with somebody and then you talk
Yes.
about your feelings. And years later, like you're still talking about your feelings. And so the fact that you say, okay, where is it manifesting? Like when I went through my right before I got divorced, I had been diagnosed with MS, like the spinal tap, the MRI, like positive on all that stuff. I go through the divorce. 6 months later, I go back in. They repeat the spinal tap, and it was gone, right? And so it's like, how do you
Wow.
go from MS to not MS? And I equals stress. And so when
No,
you talk about your body, you know.
absolutely. I just actually had an experience, and this has happened to me a number of times with clients where very similar to your story. She was diagnosed with Graves' disease. We've done a hell of a job. She's done really a hell of a job with really doing a lot of reparenting and healing, inner child healing. And it's gone like zero, like almost non-existent inflammation levels
Mhm.
in her body. And it's such a, I mean, that's profound, Charisse. Like, and that kind of stuff is what really like, I mean, as a clinician, it's so meaningful to be kind of a part of someone's journey to really look at how things are stored. And it is crazy when we kind of like out of survival, of course, out of this amazing way we survive, kind of like shove it down, buckle it down, sometimes dissociate it away, it still shows up. And oftentimes that's what what brings people to therapy and they're confused by it or there's chronic illness. And listen, not all chronic illness can be magically dissipated,
Mhm.
but so much of somatic responses that we have, headaches, stomach aches, inflammation, obviously, MS. I mean, that what an incredible story. Good work. That must have been a lot of work to get through
Oh,
that for you.
yeah, it was. And I think that that was my point is that it's not just about talking. Like you have to
Yeah.
figure out what is the root and how do you solve that and how do you
Yeah.
come to it. And so that's something where, it's hard because you never really know what is going to be the trigger, what's going to be the fact. And yeah, I talk about my sixth grade where I asked two girls to play and they're like, no. And then they started making fun of me. And then it was at that point where I stopped trying to have close friends, right? And so, I mean, I've been changing that. It's taken a lot of time, obviously, because I'm much older than that now, but it wasn't until I realized, and you start to figure out, okay, what are those life-changing moments and pivots that you do things because of something else? And I don't subconsciously versus consciously, how do you identify that if you're working with somebody?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a really good example. So if you're open to it, I want to kind of get curious about that
Mhm.
experience for you, right? So when you think of, and I know that it's shifted for you, but like if you think of making friends today,
Mhm.
where do you feel that like "Ugh," in your body, that a little bit of distress in your
Trust.
body, in your
Mhm.
chest?
Mhm.
So one way to get curious about what's feeding that is to ask someone to locate where they're feeling it in their body. And if they were to attach that even to a negative belief,
Mhm.
right? What did it mean about you that you couldn't, that these girls or these people were making fun of you or rejecting you? What did that mean about you? I am
Not good enough.
yeah, right.
Mhm.
So if you were to kind of notice where you're feeling that intensity in your chest and
Mhm.
hold that together with I'm not good enough and just trace that back in time,
Mhm.
what memories start to come up for you, right? So that's like one way that we can start to get curious about these what we call feeder
Mhm.
memories. And for some people, they're nonverbal. For some people, it's pre-verbal trauma, especially with attachment stuff, attachment disruption even if it's just like I was in the crib crying forever and no one came for me,
Yeah.
right? They can't actually verbalize that. They don't actually remember it, but their body remembers it.
Mhm.
And what do they start to do and pretzel them? Like you said, it's hard. It was hard to form close,
Hmm.
friendships.
Hmm.
So you learned how to kind of pretzel your way into protecting yourself from needing or wanting or feeling that feeling of I'm not good enough, right? Um,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think for people, especially entrepreneurs, because if you're starting to build a business, do you feel like the insecurities the person has is manifested in their business as well?
I mean, for sure. Like I'm a testament to that also, right?
Mhm.
I mean, yes, I mean, listen, when we're when we're going through life, we, especially in our early ages, we form this blueprint of we're unconsciously forming a blueprint. We're like sponges of how the world operates, right?
Right.
And then we walk through life with that programmed lens,
Hmm.
let's say. And so we bring that into like that's why a lot of people when they say, I just want to leave town, I just want to get out, like if I just leave this relationship, then everything will be better. And sometimes, listen, sometimes yes, that's
Right.
actually empowering,
Yeah.
but you still bring yourself
Hmm.
into the next relationship or the next. So unless you're, whether that's business wise,
Hmm.
friendship wise, honestly, anything we do, we're coming from our own lens in which how we have organized how the world works, how relationships work, our sense of self.
And I want to play on that or add to it because we
Yeah.
moved recently, a couple years ago, and my son was going into, well, it was the middle of his junior year. And so normally kids in high school, like, are they're not going to want to leave in their junior year, especially their senior year. So when we approached him, and it was only a half hour, 45 minutes away, but he was so excited because he felt like he had been pigeonholed into this certain, like, this is who I am, this is how I'm treated, this is blah, blah, blah. And he looked at it as an opportunity to reinvent himself and become whoever he wanted to be. So when
Yes.
we moved and the next semester starts, he was so excited. He shows up at the school. He's this outgoing kid where he's an introvert, like, let me stay in my room. I don't know anyone. I don't have any friends, to like totally outgoing, met all these people. He was being invited to some parties and activities, and he was great for 3 weeks, right? And then he meets this girl, he gets this girlfriend, which he's never had, he never dated before, and so he was like this whole different kid and he was outgoing and stuff. And then the relationship doesn't last, and he then reverts back into his, I'm going to stay in my room, I don't have any friends, I'm not, and I'm like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that people like they think I'm going to go on a vacation or I'm going to move or I'm going to do something because now I can reinvent myself. But how often do you see where people they revert back to their old patterns because they didn't have anything new in.
Yeah, I mean I see it a lot. It's not impossible though. I mean it's this idea of like an outside in versus inside out approach. And generally you need both,
Yeah.
right? So what you're describing is almost like an outside in approach. Like I'm going to act as if
Yeah.
and then I'm going to internalize it. Only it didn't get internalized
Um,
necessarily, right?
mhm.
So what and oftentimes again it's like even if we're trying a more solution focused behavioral changes like he was doing, I'm gonna like go and I'm just gonna like act, I'm gonna put on my like cool cat coat and like get out there and have this girlfriend, right? But if it's not necessary, if there's something deeper,
Yeah.
if there's some kind of like stored negative belief about
Mhm.
self, um, I don't know what's true for your son, but things that
Right.
come up common like I'm a loser, I'm not enough, I'm worthless, I'm stupid, I'm whatever, right? If that still is kind of the undercurrent and you're not necessarily feeding and nurturing and exploring that, then we're not then the outside in approach is usually just a band-aid. And that's usually when people
Mhm.
find their way to therapies like mine, when they've done cognitive behavioral therapy or solution focused, and that's great for some people, but oftentimes leaves people feeling, why can't I just implement the homework? Why isn't it sticking? Why isn't it? And
Mhm.
it's usually because it's just there's more to it than that. And it's not their fault that it's not sticking.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I hired a coach once, and she wrote a book called Stop, Snap, and Switch, right? And so
Okay.
she's made sure. And I hired her when I had just had surgery. I was not in my mental capacity because, pain medication was involved after having surgery. And so I bought this program, which was very expensive. And a month later, I'm like, what did I do? Right. And I told her I wanted to cancel. She's like, give me an opportunity, Charisse. And she coached me for 5 years with my real estate business. But Something that was profound to me was not anything dealing with real estate. She helped me a lot with that, but it was the stop, snap, and switch. So if you had this negative thought, you stopped, you snapped this bracelet, which I actually have the bracelet like in my drawer, and then you'd switch and you'd have to say something positive about yourself, different. And I
Mm,
don't know what happened, but that was life changing for me because I went from being this person who felt because of where we were living, they were bullies. I call them the mean girls. And when we moved, I started to have a self-confidence again. And I became this whole, I don't really care what you think of me because I can't change your opinion. All I can change is my opinion about myself and my belief, right? And
yeah.
so a whole new me came out, but it's not a lot of people have that. They don't have a, how do I change the past? And so you talk about how our past doesn't stay in the past and it ends up, we're going to transition into parenting. It shows up in parenting. So what do you mean by that? And how can we change that?
Yeah, also a very big question, but we'll see. We'll see if we
Ah,
can keep it succinct. Listen, when we get triggered, what's happening actually is that there are younger self states or whatever
mhm,
it is triggering gets lit up in the brain. So let's say your kid is whining, or let's say your kid isn't listening to you when you say no, right? If you, let's say there's a couple of things. If you've either are identifying unconsciously with that where someone didn't that you never got your way, or they never heard you say no, or you weren't allowed to say no. Let's say that that's very agitating, right? So
mhm.
your child does it. They're developmentally appropriately doing what they're supposed to do as a child,
Love that
which
you say it that way.
I have to remind myself of that with my kids too when I am getting triggered. Right? But it's like, okay, so something is getting lit up that belongs to a deeper past spot in the brain. But what's happening is it follows that neural pathway. It's like like a little telephone wire, and it lights up that part in the brain that is acting and responds as if there's something happening now. And it's not, it happens so instantaneously. It's a reflex. It's almost like you go to the doctor and they hit your knee and your knee goes boink, if as long as your reflexes are working adequately. And that's exactly how it is with triggers. It's like, oh, just like don't get triggered. Well, it's like, ooh, easier said than done, right? So, okay, so let's say it's triggered. You have zero awareness usually in that moment that it doesn't actually belong to your child. You just know that you're feeling helpless, powerless, and needing them to listen or to stop, right? But if we were to take a moment and pause and do a little like reset, and sometimes that's really helpful in those moments to say, oh, after you usually lose your cool, sometimes it's like, all right, here's an opportunity for repair, which is great. But we can pause and reflect and get curious. First of all, we want to ground ourselves and then get curious about like, who does that actually belong to? What is that part of me needing that it never got then? But that's kind of the gist of like how PTSD works, post-traumatic stress disorder, is that there's there's not an awareness of whatever's getting triggered in the present.
Mhm.
It's lighting up something that's coming up from the past that was overwhelming for your system. Again, it doesn't even have to be a big T trauma, although often it is. Sometimes it is, I should say. So.
Oh, we could go on so long.
I know, I know.
My gosh, I feel like we just started. Okay, so I want to talk about trauma for a second because I have a
hmm
friend. It's not me. And for real,
Okay.
listeners, it's not me. But I have a
Uh-huh. No, I'm kidding.
it's not me. But I love my friends. And so I watch because they have been in abusive relationships or they've been out and now they've gotten into a different relationship. And so like they have these kids and it could be triggered. Like this I was over at their house once and the son dropped a pizza out of the like they went to get the pizza out of the oven and it dropped and it was all over the floor and stuff and this person exploded. It was a pizza, you dropped the pizza, it was an accident, but and so you witnessed this huge explosion and the child's like it was an accident. It's not like it did it on purpose and we're all standing around and this person's just going off. Like I call it the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type approach, like really inappropriate for the situation. And the person's like, it's not about the pizza. And we're like, but it was. Because that response was not clearly it wasn't about the pizza, but it was not appropriate for what happened. And so how do you help or can you help people that are often triggering and responding to these triggers, help them understand that it's deeper and you probably need to do some work because
Yeah.
it's
I
not
mean,
appropriate.
this is the crux of what kind of like aspect of what I do with parenting and actually reparenting while you're parenting your child, right? So, listen, the fact actually that it sounds like your friend had an awareness that it's like it's not about the freaking pizza is one of the first steps, right?
Okay.
Listen, this is where there's so many parenting podcasts, so many books, so many things, so many strategies, right? And oftentimes it's like if you can implement those strategies and it sticks,
Mhm.
fantastic,
Yeah.
great. Usually, there's the reason why parents are like, it didn't work, or it worked like two times, and then is usually because there's something that's getting actually triggered in the parent, not
Right.
necessarily the
Mhm.
child, right?
Exactly.
And so if you are finding that you're having overreactions to things, or
Mhm.
that you're just like agitated, it's hard to bounce back, you're not really sure if you're repairing. So much of it has to do with attachment style stuff, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment,
Mhm.
disorganized attachment, how we've internalized perpetrators or abusers in our life. We tend to internalize them as a way to keep ourselves in check, but then it comes out in these very intense ways to other people or our kids. Um, so that's where it's usually a sign that it's like, wait a minute, like I think I need just some extra support. And I think sometimes I think it's shifting the stigma around asking for help, but it's such a gift if you're able to lean into being curious about yourself. And sometimes what brings people to therapy is they bring their child and they're like, fix my kid, you know? And listen, in this day and age, there's so much anxiety and there's so
Yeah.
much with social media and there's so much with bullying that it helps for them to have their own world.
Right.
But it is usually often what's also coming up in the dynamic
Mhm.
in the parent and their own stuff that's getting that's interrupting the way that they can stay in connection with what their kids actually needing in that moment because the kid's behavior is communicating something. The
Right.
behavior is like a symptom of something. So
Mhm.
we have to start to get curious about that. But if we are so charged that we want to either be right or we're feeling like we need to feel back in control and powerful, it's really hard for us to stay curious about their experience.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean we don't help them learn and set boundaries and say no. Sometimes I have big issues with people that don't want to say no to their children. That's usually what there are signs. I think I went on a tangent, but
No.
that's usually, I mean, all of those kinds of things are are signs about getting curious about what's coming up
Mhm.
in self. And sometimes it's very short-term work, right? Like it's like awarenesses, helping you learn grounding, helping you learn nervous system regulation. And then sometimes it uncovers maybe deeper stored stuff that transitions into longer term therapy sometimes.
You're a wealth of knowledge. Well,
Yeah.
let's transition to our momhood status,
Okay.
right? So if you were sitting at a park, and watching your kids play on the playground or whatever, and this pregnant, 9-month pregnant woman comes and sits next to you, first time mom, you start talking and you reminisce from when you were pregnant until now where your kids are, and what you deal with it professionally as well, because you see the whole gamut. What is just one, if you want to give more than that, one piece of advice you would give that new mom? And I'm not talking just as a new mom, but just if you could give a piece of advice as a grandma, which you're not, what is the advice that you would give?
Mm, that's a really good question. Um, I think it's this idea that I think as a new mom or even as a mom in general, we're like, oh no, we have like I messed up. I'm not perfect, or and I'm ruining my child, or oh no, I lost it on my kid, right? Secure attachment, secure connection doesn't come from being a perfect parent. It actually comes from those little imperfections that we have as long as it doesn't live in abuse land,
Right.
right? That where we find our way back into repair. Like that's what builds security. So all this pressure that you are going to feel like as a parent is really normal and it's a sign to get if you can be compassionate to self, to give yourself some grace, to give your kids some grace, and to really find your way back to repair. That you are going to slip, you are going to mess up. It's so important of how you find your way back, to connection. So I think that's what I would say.
And it's true, you're not going to be the perfect parent, because if you thought as a kid, I'm never going to do that when I have kids, and then you
Oh,
find
yeah.
yourself doing it, or you go the extreme opposite, like it's not good either. And
That's right. Well, and being perfect is very anxiety provoking,
yeah,
right? Perfectionism. I mean, I'm a perfectionist, but it's very anxiety provoking, and we don't want our kids to feel like they have to be perfect people either, you
right,
know?
right. That it's
So,
okay to make mistakes, because that's how you learn.
yeah.
Not big mistakes though, like the whole adult
Right.
thing.
If you can just keep it
Yeah.
like within my window of what I can handle, that would be great.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I'll take, like, I have a 10-year-old as well, that I will take those mistakes all day long. It's when they become adults and you're
I
like,
know.
why'd you do that? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's like the stakes the stakes get higher,
Right.
the errors get
Hmm.
more impactful
Yeah, absolutely.
when they're older.
Well, if our listeners think, you know what, I actually don't want to just sit on the couch and talk. I actually want to like solve these issues so that I can heal and help my children. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram at Sari Rose Therapy.
Mhm.
You can also go to sarirositherapy.com. And I also have a parenting community where and in this parenting community, of course, I'm giving the strategies and things that are going to help you, I think, feel in control. But it does offer a live monthly call with me where you can ask all the questions. So much of the resources and the crux of my work is really getting curious about what's getting triggered in the parent. So it starts to get into that deeper exploration, and you can really do that from anywhere. And sometimes it highlights a higher need for therapy. And if you're not in California or Oregon, where, my practice or the practice that I founded can offer services, we are very committed to helping people get connected in their areas, or at least get them on the right track of what modalities and the kinds of things you'd want to look for in a therapist. So you can either, all of that information you can find at Sari Rose Therapy on Instagram, or going to my website, and I can give you a link.
What is the link? Because we'll put it in the show notes.
So it's
Mhm.
www.sari, S-A-R-I, rose, like the flower, therapy.com. And actually, if anyone's interested, or if you want to offer this to your community, I dabbled in creating like a Sari connected GPT, which I know it's not going to replace therapy. However, I'm really excited about it because I believe in it so much. I downloaded so many resources and lectures that I've taught and into like the brain of this and
Oh,
attachment pairing
wow.
GPT. And you can literally 24/7 like type in like a GPT, a question, a parenting question, even a relationship question, and it will literally kind of help you with, it will give you scripts of what to say to your kids and also what to say to yourself to help ground you and start to get curious about what's getting triggered. So I am kind of obsessed with it. I use it now for myself, my own kids. I'm like, I don't think I handle that well. What does my Sari therapist brain say?
Mhm.
Because I'm human and I get triggered. So, but it's kind of bonkers. So that's also a part of my community, and you can either just have access to that or become a part of the full community where you get a live call with me also. So.
Well, Sari, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It was just felt like a very meaningful
Mhm.
conversation. Thanks for sharing your stuff too.
Well, no, that's who I am. But my husband's
Yeah.
like, you overshare. And I'm like, if I can help somebody
Yeah,
do what I
I'm the
did,
same.
then
That's right.
great.
It's a gift, right? We don't go through it for nothing.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely. Well,
yep.
Unbreakable Moms, I hope that you understand that you're human. You can make mistakes and it's okay, but it's how can you learn from those and how can you heal from those, which is important. So if you'd like more information, please go to Sari's Instagram and find out more information. And furthermore, have a fantastic day and go make it a phenomenal day. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.